There's a kind of friendship that builds, and then there's a kind that breaks. A kind that sharpens you like iron, and one that slowly dulls your edge. Somewhere along the way, we started believing that being a good friend meant never saying no, never disagreeing, never calling something out. But in truth, real friendship is not a lack of boundaries, it's built on them. Not everyone who walks with you is walking toward the same destination. And if you let every voice influence your direction, you'll end up in circles. That's why spiritual growth demands that we examine the friendships we keep. You see, a friend that constantly pulls you into comfort, into compromise, into silence may be friendly to your feelings, but hostile to your calling. In the Bible, we are said, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. That's not just a warning, it's a law of spiritual gravity. You can't keep your heart clean if you keep inviting chaos into your inner circle. There's a reason Jesus walked with 12, but only let 3 into the most intimate moments. Even he drew lines. Even he knew the weight of influence. Some of us are afraid to put up boundaries because we think it makes us unkind. But in the Bible, we are said, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. If everything flows from your heart, then who you let close to it matters. Every friendship is either feeding your spirit or draining it. And if you don't protect the soil of your soul, don't be surprised when the fruit starts to rot. This doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you love them with clarity. You love them enough to tell the truth. You love them enough to step back when they refuse to grow. Even Jesus, in all his mercy, didn't chase after those who walked away. He let them go. Why? Because he never forced anyone into transformation. He offered truth. He offered grace, but he didn't sacrifice it for approval. Friendship without boundaries becomes a trap. You find yourself saying yes to things that keep you stuck, laughing at jokes that go against what you believe, sitting quietly in rooms where you should be speaking boldly, and slowly, without even realizing it, you stop growing, you stop stretching, you stop becoming who God called you to be because the crowd around you got too comfortable with the old version of you. There's a version of you God is building, stronger, clearer, sharper, but you can't carry that version into every room. Some friends are seasonal. Some are meant to be loved from a distance. Some need to be released so your hands are free for what God is placing next. Growth costs something, and sometimes it costs a friendship that's been built more on peacekeeping than truth. But peace that sacrifices your calling isn't peace, it's paralysis. And God didn't save you to stay still. He saved you to rise, to move, to become more. And becoming more means surrounding yourself with people who challenge you, uplift you, and call you higher. That's what true friendship looks like. That's where growth begins. There's a dangerous habit forming in the hearts of many believers, a habit of saying yes when the spirit inside us is clearly saying no, a habit of nodding in agreement when conviction should be shaking us from within. We've grown so accustomed to keeping the peace, to making sure no one is offended, that we've started handing out pieces of our integrity just to avoid confrontation. And slowly, without even realizing it, our values are being reshaped not by truth, but by the pressure to be accepted. In the Bible, we are said, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Yet we often do just the opposite. We shrink into the shape the world demands of us. We soften our voice. We dilute our stance. We convince ourselves that being quiet is being wise and that tolerance is the same as love. But there's nothing loving about letting people drown while we hold the lifeboat of truth behind our back. Compromise wears the face of compassion, but it speaks with the voice of fear. There's a line between kindness and surrender, between hospitality and abandoning what you know is right. And in our effort to be liked, to be welcomed, to be seen as safe, we sometimes walk that line right off the edge. We accept invitations into conversations that insult our faith. We laugh at things we used to cry over. We support choices we once prayed against. And we call it maturity when really it's just masked surrender. In the Bible, we are said, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. That's not just a prophetic warning. It's a mirror, a reflection of what happens when we become so afraid of being excluded that we include things God never meant for us to welcome. We don't want to offend, so we bend. But in bending, we break something sacred. The boldness we were gifted, the clarity we were entrusted with, the calling we were anointed for. Some things aren't meant to be adjusted for comfort. Truth isn't flexible. Righteousness doesn't stretch to fit cultural trends. And yet we've gotten used to this silent negotiation with the world. Give a little here, laugh a little there, pretend just enough to blend in. But at what cost? At the cost of your spiritual clarity? At the cost of your witness? Because when we accommodate what's ungodly, we misrepresent who God really is. Jesus didn't come to be liked. He came to be the truth. He didn't water down his message to keep a crowd. He told it like it was, knowing full well it would offend, divide, and even drive people away. But he also knew that real transformation doesn't come through comfort. It comes through conviction. And if we're following him, we have to walk the same road. One paved not by popularity, but by purpose. Being overly accommodating might win applause in the moment. It might earn you temporary favor, but it will also slowly chip away at your foundation until the house you're building no longer looks like a place God dwells. In the Bible, we are said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. That isn't about politeness. That's about backbone. That's about refusing to compromise what God has called holy just to maintain what the world calls harmony. We've heard it said that kindness is a fruit of the Spirit, and that's true. But somewhere along the way, we began to believe that kindness alone is the full expression of faith. We've started prioritizing soft words over strong conviction, gentle tones over holy fire. But God never asks his people to choose between being kind and being courageous. He called them to be both. And when the moment comes to stand in the face of opposition, kindness without courage becomes silence dressed in politeness. In the Bible, we are said, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. That's not a suggestion. That's not reserved for those in leadership or ministry. It's a command for every believer, because the walk of faith isn't just about smiling at strangers or doing good deeds. It's about stepping forward when fear tells you to stay still. It's about speaking the truth when everyone around you wants to change the subject. It's about choosing obedience over comfort, even when that choice costs you something.
Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to obey God in spite of it. And obedience isn't always popular. Sometimes it means being the only one who says, this isn't right. Sometimes it means standing alone at the table while others laugh at things you know break God's heart. Sometimes it means being misunderstood, misquoted, or even mocked. But in those moments, we are never more like the prophets and disciples who walked before us. They weren't praised for their kindness. They were remembered for their courage. When Daniel refused to bow, he didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply stood. When Esther risked her life to speak truth to power, it wasn't just charm that saved a nation. It was boldness. When Peter declared the name of Jesus before a hostile crowd, he wasn't trying to win friends. He was being faithful. And in the Bible, we are said, the righteous are as bold as a lion. That boldness didn't come from personality. It came from purpose. We have too many believers who are liked by everyone but feared by no darkness. Too many who are present in every room but carry no authority because they've traded their voice for acceptance. But kindness without courage is like salt without flavor. It looks the part, but it carries no power. It doesn't challenge, it doesn't shift the atmosphere, and it didn't wake up what's been asleep. Jesus himself was full of compassion, but he never hesitated to confront. He flipped tables in the temple. He rebuked the Pharisees. He told the rich man to sell everything and follow him. And yet, he wept with the broken, touched the untouchable, and restored the outcasts. That's the balance we're called to walk. Not one or the other, but both. Mercy and might, grace and truth, kindness and courage. In the Bible we are said, have I not commanded you? Be strong and very courageous. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains. Not a soft, agreeable faith that avoids tension, but a living, breathing fire that refuses to be extinguished by the fear of what people might say. There's a quiet war happening inside many believers, a tug-of-war between being who God called them to be and being who others expect them to be. That constant craving to be liked, to be approved, to be applauded. We adjust our language, our posture, our presence, all for the sake of keeping everyone happy. But you cannot live for the approval of man and walk in the power of God at the same time. Sooner or later, one voice has to win. In Bible we are said, if I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. That's not poetry. It's a line in the sand. Because pleasing people feels good. It's addictive. When they smile, when they applaud, when they say you're doing great. It feeds the ego, but it starves the spirit. And before long, you're no longer led by conviction, but by consensus. You're no longer asking, God, is this right? But instead, will they like this? That's how purpose dies. Quietly, slowly, under the weight of applause. There's nothing wrong with being respectful or relatable, but when the desire to be liked starts shaping your decisions more than the voice of the Holy Spirit, you've started drifting. You can't lead anyone to freedom while being chained to their opinion of you. And in time, that need to keep everyone happy will silence the very message you were born to speak. Look through Scripture and you'll see that everyone God used had to disappoint someone. Noah looked foolish until the rain came. Moses wasn't everyone's favorite in the wilderness. David was mocked by his own brothers before he ever faced Goliath. Jesus was rejected in his hometown. And in Bible we are said, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you." That's not a celebration, it's a red flag. Because if everyone's clapping, you're probably not confronting anything. People-pleasing seems harmless at first. Just a small compromise here, a gentle agreement there. But over time, it molds you into a version of yourself that God never designed. You say less, do less, expect less. All to avoid friction. But your purpose wasn't built for comfort, it was built for impact. And impact always comes with resistance. God didn't call you to be popular, He called you to be powerful. And power in the kingdom looks like obedience, not applause. It looks like standing firm when it would be easier to blend in. It looks like disappointing people you love in order to stay faithful to the one who called you. That's not easy. But in Bible we are said, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. That's the warning and the promise. You'll never find security in approval. It shifts like the wind. But you'll always find peace in obedience. Even when it's lonely, the crowd will change its mind. One day they cheer, the next they crucify. But God's calling doesn't change. His assignment on your life doesn't bend to popularity polls. The more you chase their approval, the further you drift from your assignment. And in the end, only one voice will matter. The voice that formed you, called you, and still whispers, "Well done." Faith is not a blindfold. It's not a call to walk through life with eyes closed, nodding along with whatever comes your way. Faith is not passive. It's not just about trusting God. It's about seeing through what looks right and knowing what is right. The world says accept everyone, accept everything, but the Spirit of God calls for discernment. Not everything good is godly. Not everything that shines is light. And not every voice that sounds sweet is speaking truth. In Bible we are said, test the spirits to see whether they are from God. That instruction alone reminds us that not everything we encounter deserves our agreement. Discernment is the spiritual filter that separates truth from noise, alignment from deception, and conviction from confusion. But in a culture that elevates inclusion over integrity, we've grown nervous about drawing lines. We fear being labeled judgmental when, in reality, we are simply being biblical. Discernment doesn't come from opinions, it comes from intimacy with God. It's cultivated in prayer, sharpened in the Word, and activated by obedience. If you're not tuned into the frequency of heaven, you'll accept things on earth that God never sent. There are voices that sound like wisdom, but lead to compromise. There are movements that look like freedom, but chain the soul. And when you lack discernment, we often picture Jesus with arms wide open, welcoming all who came to him. And yes, he did that. But what we sometimes forget is that Jesus also walks away. He withdrew. He kept circles. He set limits. And if the Son of God, full of grace and truth, showed us how to guard his mission by setting boundaries, then we have no excuse not to follow his lead. Boundaries are not unloving, they're godly. In Bible we are said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's not just about honesty, it's about clarity. Jesus didn't hesitate to say no. When the crowd wanted to make him king by force, he slipped away. When the Pharisees tried to trap him in arguments, he didn't chase their approval. When his own hometown rejected him, he moved on. He was on assignment, And he didn't let emotional manipulation, public opinion, or cultural pressure pull him off course. Some of us think that being available to everyone all the time is a sign of holiness. But even Jesus went up on the mountain alone. Even he found it necessary to rest, to pray, to pull back. And he didn't apologize for it. Because boundaries protect purpose. They protect your peace. They keep your spirit sharp and your mission focused. Without them, you spend your life reacting instead of responding, stretched thin and spiritually depleted. When Peter tried to steer Jesus away from the cross, he turned and said, "Get behind me, Satan." That's not soft language. That's not an emotionally cautious response. That's the kind of boundary that protects divine destiny. Jesus wasn't rude, but he was unwavering. He didn't give the enemy access just because the enemy was speaking through a friend. He drew the line immediately. In Bible we are said, "Above all else guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." You cannot guard your heart if you let every voice have a seat at the table. Not everyone deserves full access to you. Not everyone should be allowed to influence your emotions, your energy, your direction. Boundaries are how we honor God with our time, our calling, and our mental clarity. Look at how he handled the crowds. He preached to thousands, but discipled 12. He invested deeply in 3, and when the masses left him because his words were too hard to swallow, he didn't chase them. He turned to his disciples and asked, "Are you going to leave too?" He never begged to be understood. He never compromised to keep people close. He simply stayed faithful to the truth and let people choose for themselves. There is wisdom in that posture, in knowing when to engage and when to step back, in being led by the Spirit, not guilt. You can love people fully without giving them full access to your spirit. Jesus taught us that, not with theory, but with action. He showed us that boundaries aren't a barrier to ministry, they're a requirement for it.